Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Good morning.
Glad to have you here. It's a great turnout. We've got a great program today. The two people that we have today addressing us have decided not to run for re-election, so this is their last, probably appearance publicly before the change. As a state elected official, I'll say you probably go. It would be a slow legislative year this year because it's an election year, and we realize that. But there's a lot of things that's happening, a lot of good things. I want to say this real quick to both KL and to Dale. I've supported both of them since they ran for office. I've been extremely proud of the work they've done. They have taken the hard road, and many times that doesn't make everybody happy, and looked after the state of Alabama. We're in great shape as a state, and they've done a great job. And at this time, if you feel the way I feel, I'd like to give them a round of applause. We're going to do this forum this morning. We're going to have some questions that the Public Affairs Committee has put together to get it started, and we're going to address those, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for some questions. And these will be to both of y'all. We'll do both of y'all at the same time if you want to come up and answer the questions for the public. But the first bill to both of you, the prison bill that was approved by the legislature provides 2 new prisons, and it's mostly funded by federal money. But an empty South Alabama State facility is also to be included in at least 2. I'm assuming Core Civic or someone like that. Is there any state investment, and what is the cost of the lease to the state? Do you have any information to share with that?
I'll think. Yeah, as you all probably know in this room, first, thanks for that wonderful introduction. And recognizing both of us, and we appreciate it. It's been a pleasure to serve in the capacity we have for the many years. We really have, and part of that is because of work with people like that are in this room. The prison issue is one that's been discussed for the last 5 years. Yes, there will be some federal dollars involved, but the big money for the prison build and ongoing taking care of these facilities is from the savings in building these new prisons. See, you're going to be able to shut down, we're anticipating 6 prisons will be shut down on the completion of these. They're going to be much more efficient. They're going to have things incorporated. A very important one to me is workforce training and development, work through the 2-year system. You've got to remember 60% of that population is uneducated. And to take those people and put them back out on the street without any resources, a revolving door. So yes, there will be most of the dollars from the state side will be from the savings of running these facilities versus 6 others. The facility that perhaps will be leased, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the facility in Columbiana. It's a leased facility, and they do a lot of work training there. It's very good success in that prison. And quite honestly, part of the reason that prison was brought into the formula is politics. We have some senators and House members that this was a dormant facility, a new facility. They wanted to see it utilized, and we think we can utilize it. I don't know exactly today if it's going to be utilized one of 2 ways. One could be workforce development, and the other could be dealing with our older population of prisoners and a facility to put them in and deal with, but it will be utilized. So, in answer to your question, I'll step away. I supported the bill. It was time to address this issue. They would provide newer, updated facilities, much less cost to operate, and we anticipate the savings from those costs to basically the state's share in building and supporting those prisons.
One follow-up, Dale, before we leave. Is this going to remove the federal mandate that they have?
No, it will not. I mean, the federal, federal order that's out there, we're continue to work to comply with that. Now, it will help in that it will reduce the overcrowding piece of it. but you've got several items that are in that order that have to be addressed, everything from mental health, and I could go on, but we are working to address those and have been since day one to resolve those issues.
One thing I learned early on in dealing with the prison issue, especially when you start talking about closing prisons around the state and opening the larger facilities, a lot of communities that have prisons there now are upset about the possibilities of losing those jobs, especially some of the facilities over in West Alabama where you know, the jobs in corrections are some of the better paying jobs that they have. So it's a real complex issue because you've got people, you know, wanting to keep those jobs and not wanting to close the prisons. If you poll Alabamians, the last thing they want to do is spend a lot of money on prisons. I mean, they just don't want to do that. And the same people that don't want to spend the money on the prisons or want to be tough on crime, well, you know, which do you do? But I think we've got a good plan. I voted for it. We've got a new prison commissioner in the state that was appointed by the governor a couple of weeks ago, and he'll hit the ground running. And you know, we're concerned about the federal intervention into the corrections. Very concerned about that, but I think that'll work its way out. We're having the same problems on the state level that we have right here in Calhoun County, and that's hiring people. We're just having a hard time finding. We adjusted salaries last year or year before last to try to entice some people to come into corrections, but thus far that has not worked out real well, and I think the sheriff here has done the same thing on the county level and has not had much success. So those are jobs that not too many people want, and hopefully with the new facilities, with a lot of electronic surveillance, you know, we can deal with less correction people.
Thank you, Kay. The next question, everybody knows the federal infrastructure bill passed, and there's a lot of money for infrastructure that will hit the state. Do either of you or both of you have any insight as to how it will be spent, what the priorities will be, whether it'll be fiber optics, state port facilities, bridges? Is there any talk or any question about how the infrastructure will be spent?
I serve on the General Fund Committee, and we met last week to discuss just what you mentioned there and how the money will be spent. I had an opportunity before attending that meeting to put in my 2 cents worth. One of the things I'm really concerned about, I've just been reappointed to the RMC Board of Directors here in Anniston, and they're having a crisis almost right now finding nursing personnel, and that's a pretty complex thing. A lot of the nursing people are going into the traveling nurses, and they actually have people, and I thought this was pretty bizarre, that are leaving RMC going into traveling nursing, and they're traveling to Gadsden as a traveling nurse, and of course the salary for a traveling nurse is astronomical right now because there's so much demand. But that was one of the areas that I requested that some of those funds be placed into these hospitals that are having to hire traveling nurses to come in and staff their hospitals. Another area that I've been concerned about is our homeless population. Finding housing. I've worked a lot with Lori here with the Right Place here in Anniston, and I know it's a challenge for her to find housing for the homeless. But I think internet access is one of the areas that our state has directed a lot of money in that direction. And, you know, if we're gonna keep our kids competitive with the rest of the world, we've got to have internet all over the state. And there's a lot of resources being directed in that direction right now. And hopefully here in the not too distant future, that will become a reality.
When you look at the infrastructure for the state, you really got to look at it two ways. You've got to look at long-term sustainability, and you've got to look at many times one-time money projects. I think where the federal dollars are going to be most used is what I would call more of the one-time money project, because it's federal dollars. It's a big chunk of money, and we'll be glad to get it. But that's when you'll be looking at things perhaps like big bridge projects down in South Alabama or infrastructure improvements throughout the state. We'll look at those. In the bill, now you've got to remember all that money from the feds will be funneled through pretty much ALDOT. And there are stipulations of how that money can be spent. And there will be pots for specific projects, including broadband. Last session, we passed Senate Bill 15, which actually was my bill, and with the help of Kale and others, and it's a broadband initiative that's set up to deal with broadband expansion throughout the state. Alabama Power was extremely helpful in the passage bill to understand the need for broadband expansion, and it even became more insightful with the COVID situation of the need for broadband throughout the state. So I'm glad that that is a piece of the federal legislation to be used for that one-time monies. Also, and I support it, and I know that it's always a tough thing to do, but before COVID was even thought about, we passed in the first year of the quadrennium with the governor's help, the initiative to increase tax on gasoline. It was the first increase we had in many years. Even with the increase fully implemented, which will provide $500 million income per year to ALDOT for sustainability of our road system and infrastructure, we still remain in Alabama one of the lowest tax states in the nation for fuel. I support the legislation, and I think it's going to be extremely important for the long term of the state to be progressive and get things done that we need to do in the state, from highway improvements to broadband improvement. So the money will be welcomed, but most of those dollars, remember, will be one-time dollars, and so I think as a state, have addressed with the Fed's help, we'll address that, but also as a state, because of the increase in the revenue from the gas tax, we'll have sustainability long-term. Thank you.
That's great answer. The third question the Public Affairs Committee put forward is the Affordable Care Act had a clause in it to expand Medicaid and to help the hospitals with matching money. Is there any appetite in Montgomery to join in with the other 39 states that have joined this Medicaid expansion? Would you like to address that?
Yeah, and we talked about a little bit of this before. I think that train's left the station. There's not an appetite. You got a strongly Republican-controlled legislature in Alabama. And I've got my dear friend Bobby Singleton, who's a minority leader in the Senate. He and I talk on this issue, and this has been one of the things they've carried a flag for 4 years, but there's just not an appetite on Medicaid expansion. Quite honestly, I don't think at this point in time, because I don't think Alabama can get on board at this time. I think that's done. Now, can we take some dollars and whether it be COVID money or something else and help with in Medicaid? I think we're glad to talk and have talked with some one-time dollars for specific programs. But in terms of getting on the Affordable Care Act at this point as a state, I do not see it.
I feel pretty much the same way that Dale does. I don't see an appetite in Montgomery to pass Medicaid expansion. This past session, we had a gaming bill that came forth, and I think might have stood a chance of being passed, but Medicaid expansion got put into that, and it went down in flames, but I agree with him. I don't think right now there's an appetite for it. I think at some point we're going to have to do something to address the issue with health care and with a lot of the rural hospitals around the state. You know, we lost our hospital in Jacksonville several years ago, and just coming back on the board at RMC, I've had a lot of encouragement from them about expanding Medicaid, but I think it would be an uphill battle, a big time uphill battle to try to do that right now.
Okay, that concludes the questions that we had from the Public Affairs Committee. I'll open the floor if you would please, if you have some follow-up on the 3 questions we asked, or if you have any questions you'd like to present, I'll open the floor up to the audience. Jim?
Morning. I'd like to follow up on the prison funding issue. One of the things you mentioned is the issue of the cost and the savings. One of the big issues with the federal stuff is also the overcrowding. Is there anything that can go into this session to do either or both of community-based corrections, so that people who go into the system aren't extracted from their communities, lose those connections, then they go back out and they're, whether they've had any training or not, they're back in basically a new environment with no help. Or, criminal justice reform, such as the Habitual Offender Act, that put people in for very long periods of time that may not be violent offenders at all, but they're taking up space, they're occupying resources, in addition to mental health issues.
Jim, I think, and I see this many times, these problems you mentioned here are truly problems that are being addressed. And on the local level, you would find right now that the county jail is pretty full of folks who are local and holding in place right here. As I mentioned earlier, we see a real need in this expansion project of offering much more vocational training, job skill training. I mean, I was shocked at the low percentage of those eligible for parole that had taken any type of course, and you can't force them to take it. Sentencing reform measures, in the past 5 years, there have been several that have been passed, including habitual offender, working on that. And we even passed a couple last session to deal with trying to bringing down that population. Those aren't easy bills to pass. I mean, so I think is important, what I want to say is the very things you're mentioning, many have been addressed, working on. Some of it take a little more long term because of, it's going to take us time to build the 2 prisons. But it is the goal to solve the judge's order in 2 ways. One is to have less crowded prisons by having more space. But the ideal situation is to have less crowded prisons with less people in them. And to do that, I think the vocational component is critical. And why I've worked so hard with Minority Leader in making sure that was implementing the legislation that was passed, that had to be part of the legislation. So, good questions, but please understand, we know, and Kale hit it, it's not a glitzy situation. The average citizen thinks, well, hell, it's prison, they're in there and it should be tough. But you gotta realize that when you're in our capacity, we've gotta look at what is the long-term realistic solutions to this, and what is best for the state long-term, and what's best for the taxpayer long-term is have less people in prison. I mean, people are bad, they need to be, but there are those that they do need training, they need educated, and I can tell you, education is the key, long-term, short-term, long-term, for reducing the population in prisons.
I couldn't agree more with Dale on education being the answer. I went over probably 5 or 6 years ago to the Donaldson facility over in Jefferson County, and I'm one of those that's pretty much tough on crime kind of guy too. But I tell you, the facilities over there, the cells, you know, not a big deal. But I went in a room that looked like a gymnasium, and there was hundreds of inmates in there. Had a twin bed with about this much space between each bed, and a little cubby about like that to hold their belongings. And it did something to me. I told my wife when I got home, I said, you know, I'm tough on crime, but I said, you know, we've got to do something here because these conditions are inhumane. It's not air conditioned. I had these huge fans running, and but it was a tough situation, and so it was easy for me to move in the direction of building some larger facilities. I've had a lot of conversations with our sheriff here and other sheriffs from around the state that are housing state inmates right now simply because we don't have room for them in the state corrections. And so the problem with the decisions that we've made, it's going to be years down the road. I mean, you can't build a prison overnight, and it's going to be years from now before we get any relief. And it'll be interesting between now and then how we deal with the federal issues that we have to deal with.
Wayne, go ahead, you were up first.
First, as an elected official, I just want to thank both of you for your service. You've been fine ambassadors for this area. We are all very grateful for all the work that you've done. Since we're talking about education, will this be the year that education lottery takes a step forward?
I believe you're going to see a piece of gaming legislation. It won't be mine. Listen, I'm not a gambler, but I have been supportive of gaming legislation, mainly because I think it's another way to fund education. I do think I talked with Greg Albritton last week, Senator Albritton, who's the chairman of the General Fund Finance Committee. He told me that he is going to be bringing gaming legislation this session. And I would assume that the lottery component typically has a connection with education. So in answer to your question, I do anticipate seeing it. Whether or not, the Senate voted out a piece. Senate came out of the Senate last year. It never made it to the floor of the House. So that's yet to be seen, but I do expect to see a piece of legislation.
Like Dale, I'm not a gambler either. I'm kind of stingy with my resources. But I'm very much a proponent of getting people an opportunity to vote. I've had a lot of discussions with people. Probably if I had to say there's one issue that I've talked to people more about than anything else in my 3 terms in the House, it's been the gaming. And, you know, give us a chance to vote. Give us something to vote on. And I really felt good last year that we were, you know, maybe going to have that opportunity, and things kind of went south. But, and I was a little bit surprised when I saw a week or so ago that Senator Albritton was gonna do something in an election year, because typically, you know, a bill like that, you stay away from in an election year, but I look forward to seeing his bill and seeing what's in it and how the resources are gonna be directed, if we do get it passed.
Kale's point about the presence, years ago, I sold Boyd Junior, sheriff of Calhoun County, some patrol cars, and he brought a trustee with him, and he was awful nice to the trustee, and I asked him, I said, was that somebody you know real well? He said, Henry, I know you as well as you know me. He said, the only difference in him and me and you is he got caught. So, I've never forgot that. It's always been there. We've always made mistakes and always done something, and inhumane is not right. And I applaud you for doing that. Yes, ma'am, you have a question?
I do, with the prisons, just a quick note, reading what I've read about the money and the plans going in, are there any plans for Tutwiler prison, the women's prison? I haven't seen anything go there, that's also a prison that is.
Yeah, it's not a new prison, but in the prison plan, there's several millions of dollars for restoration. Now, Tutwiler went through some restoration a while back, and the governor quite honestly wanted to build a new women's prison. But at the end of the day, there's going to be substantial dollars for upgrading of that prison.
My main question was, broadband expansion here in East Alabama. We have so much area that is rural. Do you think the money coming in is a wise investment to be working on trying to do fiber? Or do you think with the areas in this district in East Alabama, they're gonna be waiting more for some of the satellite service to come in? It's tough when you get into the really rural areas to get the support from the power companies for financial reasons, which I understand, but what do you think is the right direction?
Yeah, and I think that was the importance of Senate Bill 250 being passed, and that it sets up a commission to, among other things, to evaluate what's the best way to reach the people and to use the best technology at the time. You've got to remember, technology changes very quickly, but that doesn't mean you can sit back and wait. I mean, you've got to just keep moving with it, and this commission will make those decisions of what is the best way to provide. And the legislation very specifically says unserved areas have priority. So if it's an area that's truly unserved, because underserved there's different interpretations of what underserved is, but unserved is no question what that is. So I think you're going to see that they're going to evaluate those areas. We finally have a very good map of the state, one that we can trust on where the service is, and based on that, this commission will make those decisions of whether it's going to be satellite, fiber, whatever it may be, and it will also have the ability to change as technology changes.
Okay, you need to address that, or? Okay. Danny?
I'd like to agree with the other guys and say thank you to you two for what you've done, representing us very well in Montgomery. I agree with my friend Phil here over the years. He said our greatest asset here in Calhoun County is our people. You two have been all over the state for the last several years. What can we do here in Calhoun County, since you two are kind of on your way out and have announced not running again, to get us economically, and you don't have to be specific, but what can we do to get us to other areas of the state that you've seen that have seen tremendous recovery and booming, and we're doing okay, but we want to go to that next level here because our quality of life is second to none with our parks and our museums and our performing arts centers, but what can we do to get to that next level economically here that others have done?
Well, that's been a very frustrating thing for me. You know, I see the Mobiles of the world, the Jefferson counties, the Huntsvilles, you know, there seems to be a lot of resources that get directed to those areas, but, you know, we're kicking and screaming here in Calhoun County and are not heard a lot of times, but I think with the proximity of Atlanta and Birmingham right off the interstate here, you know, so many great things happening down around the interstate in Oxford, and will draw people from Georgia over into Alabama. I think one of the best kept secrets that we have is Cheehaw, and if we could direct resources up there and do some phenomenal things up there, I think we could get a lot more tourism dollars coming into our state. The economic development, right here in this building, we've got people constantly working on trying to get more jobs, more industry, that kind of thing here in Calhoun County, and it's a frustrating thing. We've lost a federal mogul in Jacksonville, and we're working with someone recently that was going to come in and put a grocery warehouse there at Federal Mogul, and things were moving pretty good, and then although he had said he was not going to, decided at the last minute, went to Georgia and bought a warehouse. And it's frustrating when you work with people and feel like you're almost there, and then it goes away. But Alabama has a lot to offer for people coming here with our tax base and our property taxes and everything. And we'll just have to keep working hard to make that happen.
I was fortunate last night, or basically most of yesterday, to be in Birmingham. Alabama Power hosted the Innovation Initiative meeting. The governor put together this group some year ago to talk about ways to get innovation in the state and entrepreneurship and just, really working on that in the state of Alabama. And there were a lot of excellent speakers there from across the country. The keynote speaker was Dr. Condoleezza Rice. And what I got out of that, and because in answer to this question, is Calhoun County is going to be facing the same problem, in my opinion, the entire state is going to be facing. And that is, we can create the best innovation engines and support for it and everything else, but if we don't fix the K through 12 problem in the state, then all these innovative jobs that they come up with are going to go to people from other states. Now, they're recruiting people now for these new type companies and a lot of these new companies, y'all got to remember, they're high-tech stuff. And if you don't have the basic training to even to consider being in a position to take those type jobs, then you're not going to get them. And I made the comment last night that I think we're in a way getting the cart before the horse. I think this innovation initiative is great. It's something we need to do. But it's like we're running around with blinders on. I mean, the facts are these. Listen, I'm a product of the public school system. My kids went to public school. I believe in the public school system. But I also believe, because of what we're going through right now, that you have got to have choice out there to fix the problems with education. Because when we are last in mathematics and 46th in reading in this state, that is a problem. And to not acknowledge it as a problem, and Dr. Rice and others made this comment last night, if those outside of the state don't perceive that Alabama is trying to solve the problem, then you got a problem. and I think that's where we are. I almost hate, you hear it every year, it's an election year, so nothing will happen. Well, I'm telling y'all, we are at a crisis level. If you want this area to prosper, and as I do want this area and the state to prosper, if we want our young people to prosper, then you better fix the education system. And this area has problems in its education system. We have great spots. In the state we have great spots there, and I'm happy for them. But we have got to address this issue, or there are going to be a lot of people as you move forward that will not be able to take advantage of these new positions and jobs in this state that come available. So I guess what I will tell you, and it's been a struggle through the years, and will continue to be a struggle, is either obviously find a way to improve your public education system locally and statewide, and do whatever you have to make that happen. But that is a tough challenge, and one that you're gonna find that is gonna continue to be a tough challenge, and gonna take hard decisions to be made. And so I will challenge my colleagues in the next, I met with senators and House members on this issue as recently as yesterday. And hopeful that just because it's an election year, we won't choose to just punt this thing off down the road. We'll see. But that's how, and no doubt in my mind, if you want to improve the quality of living for the citizens of the state and see your areas grow, education is the key.
Amen.
I have not a request but a recommendation, and something you can answer this. In Jacksonville, when Jim Fulton was Lieutenant Governor, was on the Board of Trustees, Matt Roberts was head of the Highway Department, was also on the trustee. And they talked about four-laning Highway 204 from Jacksonville out 431 at 10 miles. If you think about it, coming into Jacksonville from Anniston, it's four-lane. From Piedmont, over half of that way is a four-lane. But it's a bottleneck on that. And I remember when Jim used to come from Coleman over to board meetings, and he'd always be late, and he would blame it on getting behind a truck, and he couldn't pass. My recommendation is, while you're there, see if we can get in the pipeline of four-laning that highway, that 10 miles. It's hard to, very few places on that way you can pass somebody because the road is so crooked. And I know it's a long process of getting in the pipeline. But if you get it started, and I know in the budget committee, you can have a lot of influence on the highway director by his budget, if he puts in there, and get us started trying to four-lane that road. Jacksonville grew by over 2,000 people in the last census. University, Dr. Killingsworth is our highest enrollment, over 9,500 students. And that would help in economic development also. The industry that KL mentioned, talking with them, he was interested in us being close to Atlanta transportation, but also that bottleneck on that road hurts us when we're trying to get people to look at our area because of transportation. My recommendation is if you would start the process, see if we can get that, you have to get in the pipeline, and it's a 3 or 10 year process. But see if we can get started with trying to get this.
I'm glad to start the conversation. I sit on the Joint Highway Commission of the state, and I'm glad to, start the conversation and lay it out there. Of course, as you well know, it's a long process, but I'm willing to do that. But I will go back to tell you, all of you can have the best highway infrastructure in the world. But if the businesses out there don't think you have the workforce, the educated workforce, they're not coming. But that's the most critical element.
Would you talk a little bit about the Literacy Act, about the third grade reading level?
Well, yeah, and there was an attempt to put off implementation of the Literacy Act. Basically, the Literacy Act was a piece of legislation that was passed a couple years ago. I think it was Terry Collins' piece of legislation in the House, which basically says if you're not reading at third grade level in the third grade, you're not going to the fourth grade. And there was a lot of pushback on that. Then we passed the legislation. Well, COVID hit, and suddenly a lot of superintendents in the state were saying, "Hey, this act is a problem because we've been in COVID and these kids have been out of school and not reading grade level, and we don't want to hold all these kids back." And then I'm sitting there with my colleague Roger Smitherman, who I have a lot of respect for Roger. I've worked with him many years. Roger's argument is we need to delay the Literacy Act because it's going to put peer pressure on these kids who won't be graduating because they can't read at level. Folks, I'm sorry. I think you're doing a real disservice to take a child and push them into the next level when they're not prepared to go there. And if it means holding every third grader back in the state a year because of peer pressure, I'd go with that before I'm gonna tell you to advance a child that's not ready. So the governor, they literally passed legislation, or excuse me, yes, they passed a piece of legislation to delay the implementation. I was one of 5 senators that voted against it. And thank goodness I made a call to the governor and she didn't sign it. And so it is still in place. And I'm sure there'll probably be another attempt to put it off, but I just think that's wrong. I will go back to this. You cannot continue to put off the problem of education in the state of Alabama and expect the state to prosper, move forward, when everybody else from the outside is watching. And so it's time. We've got to take these things on, we've got to address them, and we've got to do all we can to at least show we're trying to solve that problem. That's my position. If that answers your question.
Dale, follow up on that real quick, and if the audience will forgive me. No Child Left Behind and 4x4 destroyed the career tech program in Alabama. We have one of the best career tech programs in any state around us. Is there any indication that the Department of Education may bring back a career tech program?
Well, the problem you got in career tech, when I was young, when I was in public education as a kid, everybody was required to take career tech. You chose something, okay? When you have that situation, everybody's included. I think what's happened over the years and has become a problem is that you have career tech in especially in high school, became kind of a stigma that you couldn't handle the academics, so we're putting you in career tech over here. And then it was almost like, oh my God, my child's in career tech. What have I done wrong? And I think you got to take that away. I mean, we've talked in this room, many of you in this room, that there are a lot of vocational jobs now that these people are making more money than college graduates. But when you got to get the education community to agree that is an element that needs to be taught, it needs to be encouraged that people to look at vocational training. But there again, in my opinion, until you make it kind of the norm, that's your problem. I mean, when I owned Aerospace Coatings, I remember this. We put $10,000 a year to Gadsden State and said this money is for anybody who wants to take machinery. And we even provided a machine, and they couldn't get 2 people a year to step into that to take that free course that was paid for. And I'm convinced to this day it's because so many of these kids coming out of high school, they're just not being encouraged to go into vocational trades. So I think we've got to change that. And we have career coaches in schools. We've done this in the past year. That was an attempt to educate parents and children that there's alternatives to 4 years. Now listen, I'm a believer in 4 years, but the fact is not everybody's meant for 4 years. And so I think those are some of the things that we've got to do. And as I'm saying, the education problem is so big, so complex. People get overwhelmed, and they get so overwhelmed sometimes they just give up. You can't give up. These different elements have to be addressed in it.
There, when we got to $10,000, the problem was we couldn't get people to pass the drug test.
Yeah.
And so we ended up giving the money back.
Yeah.
We couldn't pass the drug test.
There's multiple problems out there. We all, and we've all, anybody who's owned a business, run a business, what you're talking about is one of the issues you deal with, unfortunately, pretty regular. But there again, you can't. I'm telling y'all, especially when you're in the capacity he and I have been in, and you can only imagine in a year's time the different complex issues and problems that the state has to deal with. you truly can. You get sometimes you just want to, listen, it's almost overwhelming. You just can't you gotta keep pushing, or you gotta work to try to solve those problems. You can't give up.
Dale, and speaking of education, being an educator, just to add to your argument, that only 25% of all of our graduates go to college, and we push going to college in our high schools, and 75% do not. And so if we push more to go into the tech schools, like you said, more people earn money by getting a couple of certificates in the tech school than a normal college graduate. So we've got to push the tech schools. We've got to push it.
The only thing I would differ with you is, I'm not, and I think you and I are on the same page. It's not that I want to push anything. I just want to make sure people understand the opportunities that are out there, and these opportunities are all good opportunities. And one opportunity may be better for someone than another, but you've got to at least make sure they understand the opportunity, and that's what we've got to do as a state. We can provide these opportunities, but we've got to convince, and it's not just the student. In many cases, it's the parent that you've got to also convince that these are reasonable pathways for the child. We've probably taken more time than we're supposed to. You may want to finish this thing up here.
Let me say one thing too. I think we're gonna have to start educating children. We've always talked about, in high schools, we talked about vocations, after you graduate and everything, but I think we're gonna have to move it on back to elementary school and to start educating the kids at that point. And a lot of young people today don't realize that manufacturing today is nothing anywhere close to what manufacturing was 10 or 15 years ago. Most manufacturing jobs today are clean jobs. Their vision of a manufacturing job is, get your hands greasy and dirty and everything, but that's not the case. And organizations like Youth Leadership Calhoun County, that's in my opinion the way we do it, and that we got to start earlier. We got to get back in the 5th and 6th grade and start talking about different jobs and getting people kind of in that direction. I've got a grandson that he was frustrated at times. Didn't want to go to college, but he's ended up in a trade now. But he couldn't understand. I knew what I wanted to do when I was about 10 years old, and he couldn't understand why and I said, Austin, college students today will change majors 3 or 4 times in their first 4 years. And I said, that's no different from you. You try a job and you see if that's what you want to do or not what you want to do. But not everybody knows when they're 10 or 12 years old what they want to do. But I do think we're going to have to get back into the elementary schools, get back that far, and start talking about options for the future.
I agree. One more question, and then we've got to close it. I'd like to get them to make some statements, but go ahead.
Well, I certainly, as an educator, want to acknowledge that I think you're spot on as it relates to the importance of education in our state and it being pivotal for all other things. I often say in the community is only as strong as the public education that exists there. I wanted to just take a moment and thank you for the support for dual enrollment. That's a good opportunity. Many of our students are first generation, many poverty, and to be able to experience success through dual enrollment and to realize, wow, I really can take a college class and be successful is really an impetus for them to oftentimes come to us at Gadsden State. I think sometimes our 2-year systems are looked at sort of like the career tech programs used to be looked at. If you can't make it in the academics, you go to career tech. If you can't make it in 4-year, come to 2-year. But I'm very proud of what we do at the 2-year and very appreciative of the ways that we've seen that support, and specifically wanted to thank you for the support for dual enrollment.
Thank you. One last question, would y'all like to take a minute and kind of give an update of the future of where you see the state going? And Dale, and I had a conversation about the condition of the state financials. Would you like to address that and closing in the last, we have 10 minutes?
Yeah. In the past, and this showed up also during COVID, and Alabama was probably one of less than a half a dozen states that really went through the early stages without a lot of hiccups on the financials of the state. I mean, we actually passed a record education budget and general fund budget. Our revenues were very stable, and I think that goes to the work that the House and Senate members have done over the past many years of making sure our budget process was one that could sustain a downturn in the economy such as we saw with COVID. So I think the financial health of the state is very good. One of those rare cases in time, but it's almost like you got more money you know what to do with because all the federal money has been thrown down, and it's dangerous because what always worries me is I look at that as one-time monies, and some people want to look at it as long-time money. And so I think you got to be very careful and be very smart how you use those dollars for things such as building new prisons with a maintenance component in there to upkeep those prisons up through time. So I think the financial health of the state is very good. I will go back. I think that what we as a state have to focus on, because it impacts so many different areas, is your education. And because it will impact bringing down your prison population, it will impact having a healthier bunch of citizens in the state, and obviously it will help provide young people and young adults who go through a job or career change through proper education a better quality of life. So I think that's what we should be the priorities that we should be looking at, and that's what I will continue to try to work on while I'm still in office, and hopefully I'll work on those type of things when I'm out of office. Thank you very much.
I was talking to someone before we started this morning and explaining to them how the budgets this year are probably in the best shape they've been in since I've been in office. But there's a downside to that too. You know, the more resources you have, the more hands you have asking, you know, for those resources. So it'll be a juggling act this year as it always is. But real pleased that due to some of the conservative efforts in the past in holding back some resources, I think that's one of the things that helped us through the COVID period of time and helped our state be in much better shape than many other states, is the fact that, you know, we didn't spend everything we had in the year that we had it. We held back some of those resources, and I'm proud of that fact, and it's been very helpful to get us through the COVID situation.
I'd like to thank Senator Marsh and Representative Brown for attending today and to sharing their time and their information with us. I'm sure they'll be around for a few minutes after this is over. And at this time, I'd also like to thank each and every one of y'all for being concerned about this community enough to attend and find out where the direction and where we're headed and what's going on. Thank you. Give yourself a round of applause. That we're adjourned.